This video, Copper Pipe Plumbing Project Part 2, is in playlist Copper Pipe Plumbing Project. This video is a how-to guide for copper plumbing. It describes a project using sweated copper pipe. If you are experienced with copper plumbing, this video probably isn't for you. But if you're an amateur plumber, you'll pick up tips for planning and installing a plumbing project using many types of fittings, tools, and techniques. This video is the second in a 3-video series. To watch the videos in order, please watch them from the channel page. This is a Tom's Tech Notes video. There are over 200 computer help and hobby videos on my channel page. If the video you are watching is part of a series, you should watch the series videos in order from the playlist on the channel page. To visit the channel page, you can type this URL into your browser. You can search for TOMSTDA, and you should use the Google search. If they appear in your video window, you can click my name, Thomas Wallace, my photo, or a clickable link. To be notified when videos are added or updated, click the red subscribe button and request email notifications. As I showed you in the original picture, it's a fairly complicated shape coming out the side of the filter. The filter will be here. This will come out of the left side of the filter, hook around, go back across the top of the filter, and then there will be an elbow on the end, and the pipe will go up, and that's the hot water from the hot water heater coming in that pipe. I want to do all this soldering ahead of time so I don't have to cut the water off very long. It's critical how you line this up, but I did come up with a method that works pretty well. You take an extra union. This part is soldered onto the water filter at the moment. So I have an extra union. This is the part from that extra union, and then this is the part from the first union that will be soldered on the pipe. So the extra union, I just shove a pipe in it, so I'll have something to brace so that I can get these guys parallel. Because this pipe needs to be parallel to this fitting so that it'll come straight across the top and that the right angle bend will make it go straight up. So to ensure that the two pipes are parallel, number one, you clamp them down to the table with a board, but keep it slightly loose because put a caliper on this end and that will guarantee that when you've adjusted it to the same length on each end, that guarantees that the two pipes really are parallel. Once you have them really parallel, tighten this slightly. And notice the way I have it sitting on the workbench, this is far enough out to solder without setting anything on fire. And you prep the joints. Remember, you polish the pipe you cut with the tools we just talked about. There is a brush to polish the inside of a joint. It's a steel brush that's round, and it is a particular size for this. It's for this fitting. This is a 3/4 inch fitting. So you stick that in and you turn it around, and you do that in all the inside parts of the fittings where a pipe will be inserted or a fitting will be inserted. So you'll polish the inside of this, the inside of this, and the inside of this with that brush. But like I said earlier, I like to do a final polish if the pipe's large enough by sticking my finger in with steel wool and going around and around. It makes it a little smoother, I think. After you do the scraping of it with the brush and the steel wool, you'll want to use a dry cloth to wipe out any pieces that are there, and also to remove any pieces from when you use that deburr tool on the end of the pipe. You don't want any pieces in there. And in fact, in this setup, before I put the pipes here, I blew through them. That'll at least get some of the stuff out. But again, the pipe's big enough, you can stick your finger in with a rag around it for that final touch-up. So you've touched up the pipes. You scrape these guys out in the same thing, wipe it out with a rag, and the fittings here. Once you've got it all clamped down and in parallel and everything, pull these fittings out. Put a coating of flux on both surfaces that will be soldered for each of the 3 soldered joints. For a pipe this large, I use my fingers to apply the flux inside the joints that I'm fluxing. Coat them all with flux, put a reasonable amount of flux on, don't overdo it, don't leave any globs of flux around because they'll get in your system. So you've got it clamped down parallel, you've reattached all the joints after fluxing. Now you're ready to solder. Basically on this thing, it's close enough together. If you're careful, you can heat all of this up at once. I would use a MAP gas torch, which this is. You can actually see the word MAP. MAP gas torches are a little hotter than propane torches. They work the same, but they're a little bit hotter. Use a MAP gas torch. Heat the whole thing up until solder starts to melt quickly when you tap it against the joint. Once you get it that hot, feed solder into each of the joints until it starts to drip out. And since it is going to drip on the floor, you want a board on the floor under this to catch the drips. Once you're finished soldering, let it harden. If you really want to do a neat job, you can wipe the outside of the joints off with a rag to remove excess solder. I don't generally worry about excess solder. I mean, this is on the back wall of my garage, and if it looks homemade, so what? If it was, under a sink in a restaurant, maybe that'd be different. So anyway, that's how you support this piece for the soldering. There's another piece on the other side of the filter. The filter would be here, and it has a nut on it, so you have that extra union that you bought for this. So this is the other half. This is half of that extra union with the nut and this part. Stick a pipe in it so that you'll have a pipe out here. Hook everything up, clamp it down. That'll keep these two guys in the same plane and nice and flat, nice and solidly supported. There is enough room here to heat this solder joint without setting anything on fire. And again, go through the same prep process to prep this joint and this joint. There's only two joints to be soldered here. So you're going to go through and solder this joint, that joint, and then you'll reassemble the thing. Then the nut on the filter will screw onto this part, and this will attach. Here it is reattached after soldering. And as I said earlier, I think this pipe is deliberately left extra long, and we're going to trim it to the exact size we need. And this pipe was originally left extra long, but I have trimmed it to the right length now. So this will just, after we unsolder this, we'll solder this one on right here. Once you have this in position, you'll know exactly where to cut this pipe and this pipe so that the elbow will connect the two. Notice though, the old filter is still attached at this point. I haven't disconnected it yet, so I haven't had to shut off the water yet. As I held this up, I also noted where I needed to put a board on the wall to mount it permanently. And I cut a board extra large because I know I'm going to have to shift this around when I actually do my final assembly. So the board's extra large. We'll go over the details of how the board is attached to the wall. It's attached with toggle bolts. I would recommend you use a different attachment that's easier to work with. Toggle bolts are kind of a pain. First of all, if you don't get them with the right length screw, you'll have to cut the screw off, which is what I'm doing here. It was so long that I thought it would go through the wall of the garage and hit the other wall. So you use this electrician's tool, which has a built-in thread cutter part of it. There's holes here that you screw various sizes of screws into, and then when you clamp it shut, there's a cutter on the other side that chops it off. Some hints about using this though. Go ahead and thread this on first before you thread it through the cutter. Remember, notice which way this thing's faced. Once you cut it, don't just unscrew it quickly. Unscrew it and work it back and forth, because otherwise the threads are damaged when you cut it and you won't be able to screw the thing together again, because you have to unscrew it, as we'll see in a moment. So work it back and forth as you unscrew it from the cutter, and then the thread will be usable and you won't have to worry about it. Here's some details on what the toggle bolt does. You stick it through the board and into a hole in the wall with this attached. So you got to start out by drilling a hole in the wall big enough for this thing when it's folded down. This folds against the bolt, this folds against the bolt, and the whole thing is a lot smaller than it looks now. So, but once it's folded in, it's here. This distance has to be enough to go through the board and the, well, from here it has to go far enough to get completely through the wall board with this thing folded down, so it can open up inside the wall. That's how it works. So once you have both these cut to size and in the holes, and we'll talk about the holes right now. The holes have to be pretty big to pass the folded up toggle bolts. Turns out it's around a half an inch, maybe a little bit more. You'll just have to drill the holes to the size you need for your toggle bolts. But like I said, there's a lot of other ways to attach to a wall. You might want to look into those. Now, toggle bolts are a little tricky. Once you've shoved it in and it's expanded in the wall, if you turn the screw, so will the other end. So what you have to do is you have to pull the screw out slightly while you start screwing it in, so that the thing that folds is held flat against the back side of the wall. So you can use needle noses, or you could use a open-end wrench the right size. Turns out this open-end wrench is the right size. What you need to do on this side of the board, though, and of course you have to do all this before you put the toggle bolt in the wall, because once you put the toggle bolt in the wall, you'll lose the toggle if you have to take it out again. There's no way to get the toggle back out. So you drill a hole for the size of the screw, but then you use a spade bit to countersink a hole for the round head screw and washer. You do that because the adapter for the filter is going to mount on this board, and you don't want it to run into the screw if you find out you have to shove it across where the screw is. So you have to countersink this with a spade bit so that it's below the surface, both these holes. This is the end of part 2 of a 3-part video series. You should be watching it from the playlist page to guarantee that you watch the 3 parts in order. Once again, here are several ways to visit the Tom's Tech Notes channel page.